So, hello, humans. I have had to teach classes using CAM, Chinese acupuncture and Sebastian, quite a bit. I've had to use it, and there's a passage in it where I always thought, oh, I should research this. Well, so finally I have. So today it's kind of short, and we're going to talk about goiter, water, earth, and seaweed a little bit. That's the kind of idea. Let's see what we have. Um, First off, before we start, I'm no expert in goiter, but there are different types of goiter in Western medicine and different types in Chinese medicine. So we should just have a little bit of an idea. The type I'm mostly going to be talking about is called endemic goiter or simple goiter, which is the iodine deficiency type goiter. And that used to be really common in certain areas where there's not a lot of trace iodine in the water or in the soil. And so they started adding iodine to salt. And now, if you buy salt in the grocery store, it's iodized salt. And, if you eat seafood or seaweed or certain types of vegetables, or if the place that you live has trace minerals, then you're not at risk. But there have been certain places all over the world, including the US, where people would have like big goiters from lack of iodine. You don't see it a lot today here. Apparently, this type of goiter doesn't actually have a lot of symptoms besides the big thing in front of your throat. I think, this case is in this picture is pretty severe, but this isn't the same as hyperthyroidism. And so some goiters have a nodule or nodules, some are diffuse, some are toxic, which means they have a lot of symptoms, like in hyperthyroidism and so forth. You could read about goiter according to Western medicine, but in Chinese medicine, there are probably more types because there's so many old books that say so many different things. But Qi goiter is one that can come and go, in part based on emotions, and it is pretty like flimsy. It doesn't have like much solid stuff inside. And chi can come and go pretty easily. A flesh goiter is much more physical and fleshy, and it doesn't come and go. Yang things move and change. Yin things are more stable. So flesh is much more yin than chi. And so then there's stone goiter, which is with nodules. That could be cancer or it might not be cancer, but those three types at least are three of the main types. I read a book mentioned blood goiter. I didn't really follow up on that, but anyway, so I mentioned before that CAM, in the part of how do you treat this and how do you treat that, it says that this, meaning goiter, it first talks about more like hyperthyroidism type stuff, but it also says goiter also occurs in certain places where the soil and water are not good. And so this general treatise on etiology and pathogenesis says, and that's actually Jubing Yuan Ho Lun, which I'll talk about in a minute. It says mountainous areas with black soil at the source of a spring are not good for permanent dwelling because drinking spring water from such a place causes goiter. Well, we'll see. I've found the quote that they're referring to. We'll see on the next slide. Um, but this Jubing Yuan Ho Lun is a book from the Sui dynasty. You can see the dates of the Sui dynasty. It was really short. I think it was something like 37 years, and it came just before the Tang dynasty. Um, China had been in a period of disunity where nobody was ruling all of China for long, and you know so forth. But the Sui united all of China, and then they couldn't last. But the Tang Dynasty then lasted almost 300 years. In any case, the Sui Dynasty did some good stuff. And one of the things is that the emperor wanted people to be healthy. And so he had Chow Yun Fang write kind of an encyclopedic book on all the different types of diseases. And it's comprehensive. There's so much. It's such a big book. But what's interesting is this book doesn't talk about acupuncture. It doesn't talk about moxibustion. It doesn't talk about herbs. But the remedy for the various problems is what we today call qigong. They called it Daoyin. And, because the emperor didn't want people to have to suffer bitter herbs or sharp needles. He wanted people to be able to promote their own health by doing Qigong and so forth. So he sounds like a good emperor, hiring Chow Yun Fang to do this and wanting people to be healthy. But unfortunately, it didn't last for long. Fortunately, this book survived. So anyway, what does it actually say? It has a couple of different places. And so one of the places it says that a book called Yangsheng Fang, which is Formulas for Nourishing Life, says in certain mountains, spring water flows out from black earth. One cannot live there for a long time because it makes goiter in people who continuously eat. And I assume that means eat food grown there and drink the water and so forth. And that's basically what how CAM phrased it. But it must be from this passage from this earlier book. And so there is, as I said, endemic goiter comes from places where there are no trace minerals. And so this was such a place. There's some similar and related quotes that get a little bit different. That one said black soil. I don't know that all black soil is going to be that way, but at least in some places in China, it lacked iodine. Okay, so Sun Miao is a famous Tang Dynasty doctor. So just 100 years later or so, he wrote, whenever you encounter a spring coming from, oops, maybe there's an extra word in here, coming from a sunken area in the mountains, you cannot live there for long, as constantly eating food from this place will cause goiter. So it's pretty similar. It's almost the same passage, but there's this weird word that is like really not a common word. And so one of the things it means is a sunken place in the mountains, like a valley, up in the mountains, but there's a valley between two high peaks or something like that. It can also mean a village. So a spring in a village in the mountains. But this character is interesting, and I really checked, and nobody seemed to think it was a typo, because there are typos in old books and stuff like that. But it's also interesting because the part on the left is earth, and the part on the right is this word wu, which means a crow, but also because of a crow, it means black or dark. It's like, the Heshuo Wu is this herb that darkens the hair and makes the hair black. This word wu is often used for black because that's the color of crows. So this word has this part that's like black earth. So is it a typo? Did they squish two words together? And they use, this isn't the main word for the color black, but it's used very commonly for the color black. So I'm just wondering, I don't know. Anyway, that's what it says. It doesn't mention black earth unless you interpret this character as a bit of a typo. Okay. And then back to Jubing Yuan Ho Lun, the one from the Sui dynasty, Chow Yuan Feng writes, there are people in certain mountainous countries, counties, who drink a lot of sandy water. It's this word sha here. I'll talk about that in a minute. The sand struggles with chi and binds below the neck, becoming goiter. So it's as if the goiters are like sand from the water that's collecting. You know, you drink, it goes past, goes down the throat, so the sand could collect there, I guess, is the thinking. But this word Sha is interesting. It's also written another way that has this has the water radical, but it's also written with the stone radical because sand is, comes from stone. And sometimes those two words both pronounced Sha are interchangeable. And if you do guasha, that scraping therapy, and then the little, marks come out, the red dots come out, and so forth. That's called sha. That's why it's called gua sha. Gua is scraping, and sha is sha. And also in certain diseases like dansha is what is it? Scarlet fever, but scarlet fever has a little rash that is like tiny bumps that feel like sand on the skin. And so Sha has an association, even though it literally means sand, but in some medical context, it can be some kind of toxic thing. Um, so I don't know if that has anything to do with this, if they were viewing that not only is like literal physical sand kind of collecting in the front of the throat, but also that it had some toxicity, maybe. So he talks about that more. Goiter is engendered by worry and resentment that bind up chi. So when chi doesn't move, things accumulate, including phlegm or whatever. But it's also from drinking sandy water. It's that same word, sha. So he talks about both types, and I didn't put in most of the stuff from the worry and resentment type of goiter, but he says sand follows chi into the vessels. It struggles under the neck and becomes goiter. This initially resembles goiter nodes, another kind of goiter, but the skin is relaxed and not tense right below the neck. So, it's soft. It's not like tight or something. When drinking this sandy water becomes goiter, then there's a lumpy node without a root. Okay, so it floats and is movable within the skin. In other words, if it had a root, it would be in one place, stuck in one place, and you couldn't wiggle it around and move it around. It would be one tight lump. But this is, kind of something under the skin that is movable when you palpate it. I don't know. Um, So back to Chen Jin Fang by Sun Tzu Miao. One of the things that, one of the reasons this topic interested me is because I've heard many times from many places that Sun Tzu Miao understood that one type of goiter, this endemic goiter in Western medicine, comes from, certain places in the mountains where the water doesn't have iodine, modern people will say. And he prescribed seaweed to treat it. So, on the one hand, it's kind of true, and on the other hand, it's not exactly true. So, here's what happened. We saw the quote from Sun Tzu Miao before that had that weird character that could mean black earth, but, seems to mean a depressed or low place up in the mountains. That quote that was very similar to Chow Yuen Fang, he says that in one place, and then in a totally different section, and in fact, in a section on dietary therapy, when he talks about Haijiao and Kunbu, which are two common types of seaweed that people eat, because this is dietary therapy, but they're also Chinese herbs. And so He doesn't, in the section where he talks about the mountain water lacking something, he doesn't talk about seaweed in that section. In fact, he doesn't talk about any cure. That section is about when you're traveling and there's, various problems. And so he says, oh, if you come to this place, you can't stay there for long. And so, the remedy is not to fix goiter, but the remedy is to prevent it by not staying in that place. However, elsewhere, in this section on dietary therapy, he says Haijiao is salty, cold, slippery, and non-toxic. It's indicated for bound qi of goiters or tumors. So, when qi gets bound up, she doesn't move, so things accumulate and become a goiter or a tumor. It scatters hard nodes below the neck and pain. And some other stuff, thunderous rumbling that's going up and running up and down the intestines. It also descends the 12 types of water swelling, which would mean promotes urination to make the water swelling leave, because then it says it frees urination. And then it says it rises a male's yin qi. And I think that might mean it helps with erections, but I'm not totally sure because yin can refer to the genitals. Anyway, and then kunbu, this other type of seaweed, is also salty, called slippery, and no toxins. Seaweed is slippery when it's wet. Um, it descends the 12 types of water swelling, which was said for the other one. It treats bound qi of goiters, tumors, and fistulas. So again, goiters, and it breaks accumulations and gatherings, two types of lumps. So it kind of breaks apart things that are bound up. Maybe because it's slippery, this stuff doesn't stay together. It just kind of falls apart. And so you can see in general, seaweeds treat goiter, and Western medicine knows that seaweeds have lots of iodine, so they're going to treat this endemic type goiter, the lack of iodine type goiter. And then they'll say, how could he have known? He didn't know about iodine. Oh, how could he have known? But I think that's really paternalistic, and I think some people feel like there was no medicine before antibiotics were invented or before vaccines were invented. There was like no effective medicine, which of course is not true. So the thing is that within Chinese medicine, we know salty can dissipate, hardness. And seaweed is salty, and we know that seaweeds transform phlegm, and we consider goiter phlegm nodes. And so we don't need the concept of iodine to figure out that seaweed works for it. And so within our system, we have an explanation of why seaweed works. And so since I wasn't thinking of iodine or wasn't wishing he could understand something like iodine, he knew the medicine and the medicine works. Our theories work. So, we came to the same conclusion that Western medicine hundreds of years later came to, but it's like they shouldn't be so, it's like they're so proud of themselves. We know it's iodine. He didn't even know it's iodine, but actually they're so far behind. Sun Tzu Miao knew this in 650, and like, why don't you know this until like the 20th century? Or maybe it was, the 19th century when they figured it out. So, Western medicine was late. Anyway, I'll stop ranting now. Let's move on. I have two little cases that may or may not be, illustrative. Oh, so Sun Tzu Miao does have a section on how to treat goiter, and lots of those recipes do have seaweed in it, but I didn't pull out any of those recipes. But yeah, he used seaweed a lot for treating goiter. So Ming Yi Lei An is basically categorized cases from famous doctors, which is because this is like a collection of cases from all kinds of different doctors that was written in the Ming Dynasty, and it's organized by category, not by doctor, So goiter is like a heading, and then there were a number of things under, including some pretty wild stuff. But here we have two that are kind of relevant to today's discussion. Many people from a place called Ruzhou suffer from goiter. This apparently is a city in the Henan region. Okay. The land has many sandstorms. Today in Beijing, certain times of the year, there's incredible sandstorms that come in from the north. And so, I guess this is a similar thing. So this is like a sandstorm picture. The sand gets into the wells. The sand gets everywhere during sandstorms. It gets into the wells. So when people drink the water, it engenders goiter. Remember, sand or sha engenders goiter. The sandy water engenders goiter in some of the passages from Juring Yuan Ho Lun. So, thus, families in Jinfang, which seems to be, Ruzhou is like a big area. And Jinfang seems to be, some village within that area. So families in this place called Jinfang fence their wells with tin or with pewter. Okay, the same word could mean tin, which is an element, or pewter, which is an alloy that uses a lot of tin. And the same word in Chinese could mean either of those. They all line the well with tin coins to suppress this thing, this sand. Some sink tin into the well so that people who drink it can avoid this peril. So tin or pewter. Okay, so I'm not good at this like chemistry stuff and so forth. So I had a little conversation with AI, asking it questions about this. And so apparently, um, tin or pewter can have iodide, which is not exactly the same as iodine, but related. And it also can absorb iodine if whatever you're cooking in has iodine in it. So, if iodine is the answer, tin or pewter has some possible connection with it. Remember, it's a trace mineral. You don't need all that much. But then I asked, well, are there tin coins? And it said, no, we don't know about tin coins, but it's possible at some point there may have been. It said coins are usually made out of iron or this or that, and it named like 4 different metals. And I said, well, is there any connection of iodine with those other metals? And it said, no, only tin or pewter has a connection with iodine, even though it's kind of speculative that that might be what this is about. So, okay, that was my little, conversation with AI. Okay, so there's that. I don't know if this is relevant because of the sand and the goiter and the water doesn't have seaweed. Here, this last one, this is our last slide for today. Is another case from the same book, from the same section. There was an old monk from a place called Huating, which is also in Henan, the same region. And he traveled on foot to Henan. I don't know where Huating is. There, I looked for it, and there are like a lot of places called Huating in China, and I didn't want to spend time trying to figure out which one. So he travels, monks would travel on foot to Henan. He's an old monk, so I guess he's like a big boss monk. His subordinate temple monks and servants all had goiter. When he got to this place in Henan, they all had goiter. The monks in Luoyang, which I think is also in Henan, they all shared their small house with him. And so every meal he brought this thing called taipu, which is some kind of dried edible moss. And I think it's actually a sea moss. There's such a thing as sea moss. And this is a picture of sea moss. What do I know? Um, so he brought this dried edible moss to share with everyone. And after several months of living with these other monks, the protrusions on their necks all disappeared. It was as if they had never been sick. The temple disciples and servants were amazed and realized that salty things from the sea cliff could eliminate this disease. And actually, again, like doing some research online, it's not just seaweed, but also seafood like, fish or shrimp or whatever will have trace amounts of iodine, and even things that grow on the shoreline. Like you've probably seen moss on stones on the shoreline, like that are sometimes in the water and sometimes, depending on the tides, not in the water. Anything from that region is going to have lots of iodine. So here, is similar to the seaweed kind of idea. Well, that's my little exploration of this topic. Yeah. Okay. Goodbye.